Blackbeard has become one of the most notorious pirates because he was a great sort of self-promoter, and he would go into battle with smoke billowing around his head and guns all over him. And he was a big, tall man. He was 6'6" or so. He did have a huge beard, black beard, that he plaited when he went into battle. But curiously enough, he was not as fierce as all that. He did attack Charleston, South Carolina, and forced the mayor to give him all sorts of stuff. Blackbeard's death in Ocracoke Inlet became, I suppose, the most popular or famous pirate battle because it was well publicised at the time. And what happened there was that Lieutenant Maynard was sent by his captain on behalf of the governor of Massachusetts to track down Blackbeard. And Lieutenant Maynard attacked at dawn in 2 small ships and came up alongside Blackbeard. There was a tremendous fight on board. Blackbeard was, by tradition, attacked with something like 20 musket balls and 6 cutlass wounds, and eventually fell to the deck dead. At the end of the day, the decks were running with blood, and Blackbeard supposedly swam round the ship 3 times, headless. So that was the end of Blackbeard.
Fire that musket, and I cuts his throat.
There were a number of very nasty pirates. There was a very horrible man called Edward Lowe who used to do extremely nasty things to people. He used to, for instance, cut off people's lips and cook them and then make people eat them. And worse things than that I won't go into. I mean, obviously he was a bit of a sadist. My theory is that he deliberately cultivated a terrifying image because it made their life easier. Therefore, when they came up alongside somebody and ran up the Jolly Roger flag, hopefully everybody would surrender without a fight. So I think that was part of it, this terror image cultivated by torture and nasty things. Bartholomew Roberts was a Welshman, and he became a merchant seaman, and he rapidly established himself in the West Indies as a ferocious and very successful pirate, and he very rapidly traded up until he had a whole fleet of ships. He captured, during his lifetime, I don't know, 40 or 50 merchant ships. He sailed across the Atlantic several times, and eventually became such a menace that the British sent out a warship to track him down, and he was actually, in the end, cornered off Africa and killed in a sea battle.
According to the code of the Order of the Reverend.
First, your return to shore was not part of our negotiations nor our agreement, so I must do nothing. And secondly, you must be a pirate for the Pirate's Code to apply, and you're not. And thirdly, the code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules. Welcome aboard the Black Pearl, Miss Turner.
Well, you needed some sort of code on a pirate ship simply to provide discipline for an otherwise undisciplined crew, and the reason was to prevent the crew getting out of control, because sailing a ship was a disciplined thing. The pirate codes differ from pirate to pirate, but Bartholomew Roberts, which is the most well known, had something like a dozen rules altogether. The chief one was that every pirate had a vote in everything important. The next thing was that the treasure must be shared out absolutely equally, because they were a sort of democratic lot. There were no women on board. The pirates must keep their weapons clean, and if they deserted their post in battle, they would be marooned. They were designed really to keep the crew in order. Chinese pirates are rather amazing. There were hundreds of Chinese pirates, and Mrs. Cheng married a pirate chief called Captain Cheng, and when he died she took over this sort of pirate confederation. She had hundreds of ships at her disposal, a rule of terror all the way up and down the coast of China, and they were very nasty to their victims. I mean, they would behead them at the drop of a hat. But in the end, the authorities began to close in on her, and she persuaded them to have a sort of armistice and all the pirates were pardoned, and she actually retired. She's one of the few pirate captains to retire, and she retired, I think, to Canton, a wealthy lady. Captain John Paul Jones wasn't really a pirate. I mean, he was a privateer. He was Scottish originally. He was the son of a Scottish gardener, came over to America, became a merchant sea captain, and then during the American Revolution he joined the American Navy. He was a very effective leader. He became captain of an American naval ship, and he led 2 famous expeditions round the coast of Britain and became known as a pirate by the British because he was such a menace. And in fact, he made his name with a tremendous sea battle off Flamborough Head off the east coast when he attacked a British warship and forced it to surrender. Robinson Crusoe is another of those red herrings, really. Robinson Crusoe was a fictional character, obviously, first of all, but the thing about Robinson Crusoe, where he sort of ties into pirates, is that Daniel Defoe based his life on that of Alexander Selkirk, who was a real-life seaman who was marooned on the island of Juan Fernandez by William Dampier, who was a privateer, formerly a pirate. He was on the island for, I think, 4 years, and he lived on goats and fish and things and tamed all the cats in the island, and was then picked up by Woodes Rogers, who was doing his circumnavigation on the way home. Captain Kidd never meant to be a pirate. He was a Scotsman who went out to live in the West Indies. He became a privateer. He bought a house in New York, married, and had 2 daughters, and he then went to London and he set up a privateering expedition, went out to the Indian Ocean to catch pirates, but he had a mutinous crew. He didn't catch any pirates, and he actually turned pirate himself, captured a ship called the Quedar Merchant, which was a treasure ship, and upset the East India Company by capturing a East India Company ship. A reward was put out for him.
Described as 5 feet 10 inches in height, brown bushy hair, shabby with an inclination to be genteel.
When he arrived back in New York, the governor there arrested him, sent him back to England. He was tried before the House of Commons, the only pirate to be tried there, and was condemned to death and executed at Execution Dock. And to this day there is an inn called the William Kidd overlooking the spot where he was hanged. There were 2 famous women pirates. They were Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Mary Read was brought up as a boy, joined the army as a cadet, went out to Flanders, married a soldier, soldier died, and then joined a merchant ship, went out to the West Indies, and the merchant ship was captured by Calico Jack, a pirate, who already had on that ship Anne Bonny as his lover. Now, Anne Bonny had been born in Dublin. She married a sailor called Jack Bonny, who was a rather useless sailor, but took her out to Nassau, where she fell in love with a much more dashing Calico Jack. So there was Calico Jack with the 2 women on board, who were by far the fiercest members of his crew. Calico Jack is sailing off the coast of Jamaica. He's intercepted by somebody called Captain Barnett, who'd been sent out to capture pirates. They're all captured, sent to the capital of Jamaica. A trial takes place. All the men are hanged, but the women get off because they both managed to get pregnant, and you couldn't hang a woman with an unborn child because the child was innocent. of those, really. The other area that actually the pirates in the Caribbean used to go across to, and one of the things one has to remember, a lot of pirates crossed the Atlantic several times, and one of their targets on the African coast was the Gold Coast, which was another source of gold, and it was a source of ivory, and it was a source of slaves, which of course were considered merchandise in those days. And so a lot of pirates headed for the Gold Coast and raided the ports along that particular stretch of the African coast. So that, yes, that was another pirate area.
Samuel's hides can find Mr. Silver, but not when them that finds has hid it, says I.
The thing about buried treasure is that I don't really believe in it. There definitely were certain accounts of buried treasure. We know that Captain Kidd buried some treasure on Gardiner's Island outside New York, but we think that most of it was subsequently retrieved within a year or so of him doing that. And my theory is that Captain Kidd's whole life became so famous because he was tried in London and executed at Execution Dock, that buried treasure became associated with pirates. There are, in fact, very few accounts of pirates actually burying treasure, and in a way, what's the point? What you wanted to do was to get back to civilization and blow the money on wine, women and song, and not bury it in the sand somewhere. I must say, if I was going for buried treasure, I would look for sunken treasure galleons, Spanish treasure galleons, because we know where a lot of them were. Many sank in the Florida Straits and the Windward Passage and in the Havana area, and you know, there's a lot of treasure out there waiting to be found, and you're far more likely to find one of those than a sunken pirate ship. In the days of Francis Drake, and a bit later than that, the Spanish treasure galleons used to go regularly from the Spanish Main via Havana back to Spain. And so people like Henry Morgan and Francis Drake beforehand knew the treasure galleons' routes and would intercept them. But later pirates actually would know where the trade routes were, and they would shadow a merchant ship for a while and try and work out whether it was a ship worth attacking and whether it was powerfully armed, and if it was too powerfully armed they wouldn't attack it. Pirates first of all went for gold and silver, because that was what would make them rich quick. But also, and what is surprising, is that pirates used to steal what you would call household goods. They'd steal soap and bits and pieces just to keep them going on board. They would also steal very often essential items of gear from the other ship. They might steal anchors and ropes and that sort of thing. A lot of ambitious pirates would trade up their ship, so they would start with like a 26-gun ship. They would attack a 42-gun merchant ship and then take over the merchant ship, and that will become the pirate ship. They put some more guns on it, and some of the famous pirates would have a little fleet of pirate ships, so that they'd be on the biggest one and they had 2 or 3 other ones as well. And what they always endeavoured to steal was plenty of drink.
Give me a full one, George.
And one of the interesting things about a pirate attack is that having got all the loot they wanted, they would end up completely plastered. So that was the usual end of a pirate attack.
I know every seaman in these here parts like the palm of his hand.
Did you know Captain Billy Bones?
What ship did he sail in, matey?
He was a pirate.
Piracy is a huge subject because there've always been pirates. I mean, ever since the first person set off in a boat or, you know, sitting on a log or something, there were other people to capture that particular ship. There were Greek pirates, there were Roman pirates, the Vikings certainly count as pirates. There have been pirates in the Far East, Indian pirates, Mediterranean pirates, the Corsairs. The golden age of piracy was roughly 1650 to about 1720 or so. And we call it the golden age because it had all the famous pirates operating at that time. I mean, there was Blackbeard and Captain Kidd. and the female pirates. All the notorious ones were operating during that period. And there are still pirates today. So, I mean, right the way through history, the pirates have been around. Pirates were amazingly democratic, and there was a captain, obviously, and he was the chief chap on board. A good pirate captain was, first of all, a good leader of men. I mean, that was absolutely basic. And secondly, an excellent navigator. And thirdly, a good leader in battle.
We'll board the ship and kill everyone else!
The very interesting thing about pirate ships, as opposed to the Navy, is that if the crew decided they didn't like the captain, they could actually vote him out of office. And there are many times when this happened. You know, the captain wasn't brave in battle, or he upset them, so they simply voted him out and voted somebody else to become captain. There was a quartermaster who acted on behalf of the crew, and he was the one who, when they attacked a ship, would lead the crew into action.
Come on!
And then there might or might not be a boatswain and a carpenter, usually a cooper for making the barrel.
If Drake had thought of coming to you first, should we be rejoicing at the good news?
You cannot mean Drake's raid on Cadiz.
I do mean Drake's raid on Cadiz.
Sir Francis Drake would never have seen himself as a pirate, but the Spanish did see him as a pirate, and the reason was that Francis Drake went out on a series of plundering expeditions on the Spanish Main and attacked Spanish ships and Spanish treasure ports.
In the last month, English pirates have destroyed some 7,000 tons of our shipping.
When Francis Drake came back, he had a ship loaded with treasure, worth $60 million, something like that. And he then becomes, in fact, a part of the English Navy, and he then becomes an English hero, really, and attacks the Spanish Armada and attacks Cadiz and so on. So he ends his life as Sir Francis Drake and a great British hero, but he began life as a pirate. The most dangerous thing, I suppose, that a pirate faced was a storm at sea, and particularly in the West Indies, a typhoon or a tornado. I mean, that was a devastating thing you endeavoured not to be anywhere near. Apart from that, shipwreck, which could happen even on a calm day. If you didn't see a coral reef, you could go around on a coral reef. Dead calm was not a favourite thing for a pirate, simply because you weren't getting anywhere and you could run out of food if you weren't out in the middle of the Atlantic. Some ships did have oars. I mean, Captain Kidd, his ship was called the Adventure Galley, and it did have oars. But, you know, if you're in the middle of the Atlantic, there's no way you're going to row 3,000 miles to the nearest bit of shore, so you just wait for the wind. The sea fog was a terrible danger then and now for seamen.
Listening for the breakers. In weather like this, you don't see an island, you hear it.
Suddenly the world shut down and you didn't know what was around you, and you could bump into another ship or into a bit of land. So those were the main things, really. The thing about pirate ships is they came in all shapes and sizes, because there was no such thing as a pirate ship built for a pirate. It all depended on which ships the pirates were able to capture. So they might mutiny and take over the ship they were on, or they might have got a small ship, attack a larger one and take that one over. The movies always show huge pirate galleons, and I think the reason for that is that the movie director wanted a huge deck so he could have sword fights and people swinging through the rigging. But all my research has shown that the favourite pirate ship was much smaller. It would often be a single-masted vessel, we would call it a gaff cutter now, with one big huge gaff sail, heavily armed. The reason they liked the smaller ships with the big sails was that they were faster, they were shallow draft, so that they could escape from a much deeper draft vessel in shallow water, and they could be beached at low tide so that you could scrape off the barnacles. A few pirates, like Bartholomew Roberts and Blackbeard, did have large, almost warship-like ships, but they were fairly rare. They were the most successful pirates that went in for the big ships, but your average pirate went in for something much smaller. The pirate hoped that you wouldn't see it was a pirate ship until the last moment. And many pirate ships endeavoured to look exactly like merchant ships and would actually fly friendly flags of a neutral country like Holland or something in order to lull the victim into a false sense of security. And then at the last moment they'd swoop up alongside and raise the Jolly Roger and attack.
Oh, poor mean gun I am, and I haven't spoke with a Christian these 5 years.
5 years? Were you shipwrecked?
Nay, mate, marooned.
The chief pirate punishment was marooning, which was very simple really. You put the pirate ashore, usually on a deserted island or islet, and by tradition he was allowed a gun and a bit of gunpowder and some bullets and a flask of water to survive or not. It all depended really whether he was picked up by a passing ship. Cutting off ears and noses was reasonably common, and then of course death for anyone who really broke every code in the book, and how you were killed depended on the pirate captain, really. Walking the plank is, as far as I'm concerned, a complete myth. In all the research I've done on pirates, I found one account of walking the plank. The thing about walking the plank is that it appears in Peter Pan. It then appears in all the famous movies, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Errol Flynn. Everybody's seen the movies, and therefore everybody assumes pirates make people walk the plank.
Jack Sparrow, be it known that you have been charged, tried and convicted for your will.
What I think is so interesting about pirates is that they are instantly recognisable. Somebody can walk into a room and they've only got to have an eye patch or a wooden leg and they're a pirate. And they become associated with a whole lot of things, like walking the plank and all that. But I suppose the key recognisable things are wooden leg, scarf round head, eye patch, earring, pistols, and parrot. I love the whole thing of pirates and parrots. I did quite a bit of research on it. The fact is that parrots were very popular souvenirs for sailors to bring back from the tropics. I mean, they also brought back monkeys and occasionally things like tigers as well, but a parrot was a much easier thing to bring back. You could teach it to whistle and to say things like pieces of 8. The earring was something that you put your savings into, and it was gold. And actually one theory I've heard is that the gold earring would pay for your funeral, so that when you were collapsed on the deck with a knife through your throat, your mates would make sure you got a decent burial. I think the reason pirates had eye patches was simply because, like sailors, they were prone to shipboard accidents and being caught in a sea battle, and you find in accounts of ships' crews that sailors have missing fingers, missing limbs, and missing eyes. And an eye patch is what covered up the missing eyes. So simple as that, really.
Was it a one-legged man?
The thing about peg legs or wooden legs, incidentally, Long John Silver does not have a wooden leg. If you read Treasure Island, he just has one leg only and he hops around on a crutch. And yet he's given rise to the fact that all pirates had wooden legs, so it's sort of rather ironic. But lots of sailors had wooden legs simply because they were easily damaged on board a ship. I mean, sailors were always falling out of the rigging, and you could get yourself crushed with ropes and fall overboard or crush between ships, or get your leg shot off with a cannonball. So sailors tended to have bits and pieces of their bodies missing, and obviously if you had a leg missing, you made do with a wooden leg. I reckon round about 1700, the pirates in the Caribbean started to use a black flag with some sort of scary symbol on it, like a skull or a whole skeleton. The early pirate flags sometimes had a hourglass as well as a skull or something like that, and the theory was that you've got a limited amount of time, and if you don't surrender within that time, you will be dead. So over about 20 years, the skull and crossbones gradually became recognised as the pirate flag. Though actually up to that point, different pirate captains had had variations of their own, but that's what ended up as the pirate flag. There were really sort of four broad areas of piracy. There were the pirates themselves, there were the privateers, there were buccaneers, and there were corsairs. Privateers were merchant sea captains and their crew who, in a time of war, were given a letter of marque, which was authorization to attack the ships of another enemy country. And the trouble is that when peace was declared, they were reluctant to stop attacking the ships of another country, and so they tended to slip into being pirates after being privateers. Buccaneers is a term that people get confused about, really. Buccaneers was a term generally given to the pirates and privateers who were operating in the West Indies around the time of Henry Morgan. That's in King Charles II's reign, so we're talking 1660, that sort of period. And they mostly attacked the Spanish ships and the Spanish treasure ports operating on the Spanish Main. And Henry Morgan, for instance, burnt Panama City to the ground. The corsairs were straightforward pirates, but they were the pirates operating in the Mediterranean, and they mostly operated out of North African ports. And the fourth lot, the pirates, were simply enemies of everybody, and not just the Spanish or the French. The definition is quite simple. A pirate really was simply someone who committed robbery on the high seas.
All hands on deck! Man the windlass!
I think a pirate life was fairly bleak. They have a romantic image because you associate them with tropical islands and they have a sort of glamour about them, but in fact, it was a fairly desperate life. Life on board a pirate ship, as indeed on any sailing ship in those days, tended to be a sort of variation between sheer boredom and then frantic action. So for days at sea, nothing much would happen and you'd be in calms and just sailing to get somewhere. And then you would attack a ship or encounter a storm and furious action immediately happened. So it was long periods of nothing and boredom when they all got drunk and gambled and that sort of thing. And then suddenly all hell broke loose and you were hard at work. Well, the conditions on board were very hard. Being a sailor at all, whether it was on a warship or a merchant ship, was a very hard life. I mean, the food, once you'd run out of bread and fresh meat and fresh fish, you were down to salt beef and a sort of ship's biscuit, which was hardened bread, and beer that had probably gone off, and water that tasted foul. It was not a very pleasant life. I mean, I think your average pirate spent a lot of time being hungry, worried about being captured, and just looking for the next meal, really. The only thing that kept a pirate going was the next victim and the next ship. So not a good career move on the whole.
till dark. They come at dark.
Sailors as a race, and pirates, remember, were sailors, were and still are extremely superstitious. Being a sailor, particularly in the days of sail, was a very dangerous profession, so you didn't want to stir up anything that might cause you to end your life in a storm.
Hard apart! Hard apart! Hard apart, sir!
While a ship was being built, it was traditional to put a coin on the mast step, as it was called, which was the bit that the mast went down on. That's still done today. And traditionally, sailors didn't like women on board ships either. Women were meant to be bad luck, so if women weren't allowed on board a ship because they brought bad luck, you didn't take a woman with you.
Well, shiver my timbers. This here was cut from a Bible. What fools cut a Bible?
By tradition, sailors did not set sail on a Friday because Friday was the day that Jesus Christ was crucified, and so that was a bad luck day for sailing. But you could well not come back from a voyage, so you did nothing to tempt fate, really.
You best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. You're in one.
There was a fairly standard method of pirate attack, that you would shadow your victim for a while. When you thought that ship's worth attacking, you would then come up alongside, fire a shot across the bows, which was the traditional way to say heave to and stop your ship. And the pirates would then all appear on deck and make a huge noise. They'd fire one or two guns, but not a lot, because they didn't want to damage the ship. They would throw hand grenades on the deck. They would all yell at the top of their voices and wave their cutlasses around and generally terrorise the merchant ship they were attacking, come up alongside, throw grapnel hooks to secure the two ships together, and then they would board the victim, and then if the crew of the victim hadn't completely surrendered by that stage, then they would cut their throats and throw them overboard, but probably they would have surrendered anyway. There are 4 or 5 famous pirate battles. To me, the most romantic one, it would be the most difficult to film incidentally, was the final battle of Bartholomew Roberts, which took place off the coast of Africa in a gale, and Bartholomew Roberts had 2 ships, and he was attacked by a warship called HMS Swallow, and the battle took place in the height of a storm. Both ships were firing at each other, and in the end Bartholomew Roberts was killed by a cannonball at the height of the battle, and his ship was captured and most of the crew were subsequently hanged. If we start at the biggest and work to the smallest, the chief weapon obviously on a pirate ship was the cannon on a gun carriage. If you worked your way down from there, there was a musket, which was a long barrel gun, which the pirates got very good at using. And then there was the pistol, which usually the captain and the quartermaster would have pistols, but not all the individual pirates. But the favourite weapon of all seafarers, and certainly all pirates, was the cutlass.
You'll have to make do with a sailor's cutlass.
Truce be over! Cutlasses, you swab!
And the cutlass was a short sword with one edge sharp, and the reason that they liked it was because it was short and didn't get in the way of the rigging, and you could just hack away with it. And then moving on, there were things like boarding axes. A boarding axe was like a tomahawk, and then daggers, knives, things like that. And actually they also had, and it's not often realised, they had hand grenades in those days as well, which were simply blocks of iron which were loaded with gunpowder and had a fuse, and pirates used them a lot. They were very effective in terrorising the crew of a ship before you actually attacked.